Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all having an amazing day so far. Today's video is going to be kind of like a wrap up of my sophomore year at Yale, and I'm going to be talking about all of the classes that I took throughout my fall semester and spring semester of my sophomore year. I'm going to be rating them, reviewing them, and giving you all of my honest thoughts on the classes that I took. And the classes that I took throughout my sophomore year as a whole were so much better than freshman year, but there are a couple of really bad ones, so we will get into that. I filmed a similar video to this one after each semester of my freshman year, but I decided to just film this at the end of my entire sophomore year. So I'm going to go through all of my classes from both semesters of sophomore year in this video, and I'm just going to do a whole ranking of all the classes I took throughout sophomore year. The classes I took during my fall semester of sophomore year were Intro to Psychology, another psychology class called Thinking, Intro Macroeconomics, and Level 2 Spanish. And then during my spring semester I took L3 Spanish, a seminar called The US and the Pacific World, which was about US history, another seminar which was about the Olympic Games, and Psychology and the Good Life, which is Yale's famous happiness class. So like usual, I'm going to start from the bottom of the list and work my way up. There's 8 classes altogether. I took 4 each semester. So starting at the bottom of the list, in 8th place we have L2 Spanish. Okay, you guessed it, but actually number 7 is not L3 Spanish, because L3 Spanish was kind of a vibe, but we'll get to that. Anyway, L2 Spanish. So basically at Yale there's a language requirement, so if you've never done a language before, or if you're like starting a language at the lowest level, which I hadn't done Spanish before. I did a few other languages in high school, but I decided to start a new one at college, so I started with level 1 Spanish. And if you're starting from level 1, you have to do level 1, level 2, and level 3, so you have to take 3 semesters of that language, which is quite a lot given you're only at college for 8 semesters. It's kind of almost half, but anyway. So I took level 1 Spanish in the spring semester of my freshman year, and then I took level 2 Spanish in the fall semester of my sophomore year. Most of the language classes are 1.5 credits, so L2 Spanish gave me 1.5 credits, and the normal, like the average level of credits for a Yale class is 1. So language classes are a lot more work and they meet more frequently, so you get more credits for them. So it was 1.5 credits for that. I took the class because I had to. I have a list of pointers on my phone that I'm just going to answer for each class. The classes for L1, L2, L3, and L4 Spanish meet every single day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and they are 50 minutes long, and they're a very small class size because it's kind of like, is a pretty immersive course, so you speak only Spanish. After your first week of L1 Spanish, I think, you just go straight into, you can't use English in class. The classes were every day, and I think there was around maybe 12 people in my class. The Spanish department actually gives students an asynchronous day, so that meant that we didn't have to go to class on Wednesdays, but we still had to like work. We had like a class's amount of work to do for that day on top of the homework that we already had, but we didn't actually have to go into class, so I just had to go into class Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Now the reason why L2 Spanish is at the bottom of the list is because it was so hard. There was so much work, the exams were so hard. I just found it really, really difficult. This was definitely the most difficult level of Spanish for me, and it was just also, I took it at 9:25 a.m, which I kind of am slightly a morning person. Like, I'm always awake before then. It wasn't an issue that, oh, I wanted to sleep in longer, but I do kind of like having my mornings to myself. I'm realizing that I don't love having classes at 9 a.m, and this was just not fun every morning to wake up and know that I had to go straight to Spanish. And overall, it was just really hard. It was so much work, and I just did not really enjoy it. It's kind of at that stage of learning a language that I think is the hardest, where you are not in the intro stage anymore, but you're also not really very good. In terms of assignments and exams, we just had so many assignments. We had homework assignments due every single day on SuperSite, and then we had other homework, and then we had these quizzes that we had all the time, and then we had a couple of exams throughout the semester and a final exam as well. We actually didn't have any oral exams. I've only ever done 1 oral Spanish exam, and that was during L1, so it was on Zoom. So I think I lucked out there, but yeah. The exams were hard, the class was hard. I ended up doing fine, but it was a struggle. Overall, I did not really enjoy the class, and would I take it again? Well, I had to take it, so I guess yes. But like, if I had a choice, then no, I would not. Okay, moving on to number 7 on the list, second last, is Introductory Macroeconomics. So this class was just 1 credit, so an average workload. And the reason why I took this class was because when I came into Yale, I thought I was either going to major in sort of like biomedical sciences, maybe chemistry, biology, something like that, or economics. And I've gone through several changes since then, and I've arrived at psychology now, so I'm majoring in psychology. But the reason I took intro macroeconomics at the start of sophomore year was because I hadn't taken any psychology classes yet, so because I only decided I wanted to major in it like halfway through last summer. So I was trying to like keep my foot in the door of economics in case I did want to end up majoring in economics. So I took intro macro and it was bad. There were 2 75-minute lectures each week on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then you had a discussion section which went for 50 minutes. So the lectures are just the entire class is in a lecture hall listening to the lecturer, and then the discussion sections are with one of the like teaching assistants, and that's kind of a place where you can ask more questions and they just go over the content from the week, make sure you all understand it. You do a couple of example questions on the content learnt that week as a class, and I would not have got through this class, actually I would have, but I would have had a worse time in this class if it wasn't for my teaching assistant. He was so great. He's actually from Australia, so that's always a good thing, but he was just so great. I didn't love the professor for this class. I think his teaching style just didn't really work for me. I found myself really struggling to stay awake in the lectures. I found his lecturing style quite boring. I'm sure it worked for other students, but just personally it didn't really work for me. And I tried my best to focus during the lectures, but sometimes my attention did slip. So I was really grateful to have a teaching fellow whose teaching style did work a little bit better for me, because that meant during our discussion sections, which were on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. I had a class from 8 till 9 p.m, which is, I didn't realize classes occurred at that time, but when you're trying to fit things in around practice, they do. Anyway, in our discussion sections, I would ask my teaching assistant a lot of questions and he would help kind of clarify information for me. The content was just an average level of difficulty. I didn't find it too hard. That some of the math sort of stuff was kind of annoying. The workload was manageable. Basically, we just had a problem set due every single week, and then we also had a quiz every single week, but you could take the quiz as many times as you wanted. So that was just kind of more practice, and the problem set was you could only submit it once. And then we had a midterm exam, maybe 2 midterm exams, and then a final exam, which got moved online because of COVID, like the day before we were meant to take it. So overall, I did not really love the class. I just found it quite boring, to be honest. Would I take it again? No, I would not take it. But I would recommend it if you are, well, if you major in economics, you have to take it. So if that's something you really love, then it'll be a good class for you to take probably. But then again, it is an intro class, and generally the intro classes are less exciting, and then as you get deeper and deeper into the major, the classes become more exciting. So sometimes if you're majoring in something, you just have to kind of like battle your way through the boring introduction classes until you get to the kind of more exciting content. So I personally wouldn't take it again, but if you're majoring in econ, then you would have to. Okay, number 6 on the list is level 3 Spanish. So I mentioned level 3 Spanish was so much better than L2. By the end of the fall semester, I was actually kind of enjoying going to my Spanish classes. So similar to L2, this was worth 1.5 credits. It met every single day apart from Wednesday, which was asynchronous. And we had kind of a similar class size. There was maybe 14 or 15 people in my class. And the people in my level 3 Spanish class were just such a vibe. It was just such a good class. And my professor, he was great. He was so great. I think it was really him that made me enjoy the class so much. He was just so much fun, and I feel like I was really engaged and excited about learning Spanish because my professor was just such a vibe. He was so good. Level 3 Spanish also was a little bit easier than L2 Spanish. It was almost, a lot of the stuff that we learned was almost kind of reviewing L2 a little bit. We did learn a bunch of new stuff as well, but overall the workload was definitely a little bit less than L2. We still had the super site that was due every single day. We had assignments that were due all the time. Actually, I would say the workload was probably similar, but in terms of the content, it was a little bit easier. We still had, like I said, the super site due every day, all these assignments due all the time. We had to read a couple of little books. We had a couple of midterm exams and a final exam, so there was still a lot of stuff to do. It took up a lot of time, but it was just overall a little bit easier in terms of the content. And I think that's also because once you get to L3 Spanish, you're kind of at that stage where you're almost like kind of very basic conversational, so you feel like you're starting to get good. You feel like all of the difficulty of learning the basics of the language are you're actually starting to be able to use them, and you're gaining a bit of momentum, so I think that also helped. Another thing that helped was that I took this class at 11:35 instead of like 9:25, so it was a little bit later in the day. I felt like I wasn't waking up and going straight to Spanish. It was more just kind of like a 50-minute thing that I had to do before I went to lunch. So overall, L3 Spanish was a vibe. Would I take it again? Would I? Honestly, actually no, yes. Yes, I would take it again, because L3 Spanish has made me kind of want to do L4 Spanish, which unfortunately I don't think I can fit into my course schedule next semester because I have so many classes that I need to take to fulfill various requirements. Yeah, I would take this L3 Spanish class again. It was kind of fun. Alright, number 5 on the list is thinking. So this is the first class where the name doesn't really explain totally what the class is about. So this was a psychology class, and it was basically about thinking and decision making, so just how humans think and how humans process information and how we then use that information to make decisions. The professor of this class was really great. She's known to be a very good professor. So this class was worth 1 credit, and I took this class because I was interested in majoring in psychology, and this class just really kind of sparked my interest. It's a class that you have to apply to because it's capped at 100, so only 100 students can be in it, and it's only for freshmen and sophomores. So I was trying to do it my sophomore year, and I had to apply for it back in spring semester of freshman year, and I got in, so I took it. And this was back in fall semester of sophomore year, so I wasn't really sure if I was going to major in psychology at this stage, but this just sounded like a really interesting class to me. The classes there were 2 75-minute lectures every single week, so on Mondays and Wednesdays. And one thing that I really liked about this class was that we didn't have problem sets, which are just a bunch of questions that you have to do outside of class and then submit them each week like a lot of classes have. We actually, at the end of each class, we had a very short kind of like 5-minute quiz that we had to do right at the end of each class before we could leave. And what that did was make sure that we were all paying attention and engaged during class, and making sure that we were asking questions as she went along through the content, and that we understood as we were going along, because we knew that we were going to have a quiz on the content that had been in that class straight after the class. So if we didn't understand it, then we needed to ask her that question right then and there, so that we knew it for the quiz, rather than, you know, going to see her the next day or the following day, and then you'll probably forget to do it and you won't actually end up doing it. And it's always better to understand as you go along anyway. So that was one of the reasons why she had a short quiz after every single class, and those were assessed. But that was kind of like our regular assessed work. Instead of having homework, we just had a quiz straight after each lecture, and so that meant we didn't have homework throughout the week, really. We just had to kind of study and review the content, but we didn't actually have a piece of homework to hand in. Also, as the class progressed throughout the semester, every so often we would have review and discussion questions to do. So we would have some questions that we had to answer, but these were definitely not every single week. It was much less frequent than that. So we would have to go, you know, answer these questions in our own time, and then we would have a lecture where we kind of like went into class, and instead of there being content taught, we would go through the questions and we would discuss them as a class. That's one of the reasons why the class size is kept at just 100, because we had some class discussions and she would pick different people to answer the different questions. And so that just kind of was another way to keep us on top of making sure we were reviewing the content as we went along. And so then I think we had 2 midterm exams and a final exam. I think this was back in fall semester, so I can't exactly remember. But then when we got to each exam, we had been forced to review the content as we went along. So it wasn't very difficult to study for. You didn't really need to spend a lot of time studying for them because you had been doing the revision as you went along. I really appreciated the thought that went into the kind of development of this course. It really felt like it was designed to enable students to learn in the best way possible and really kind of engage and connect with the content and retain the information that they learned. And then the content itself was really interesting. I am very passionate about psychology, so I do find things like that interesting, but I think anyone would have found all of the different things we learned so interesting. The professor was great, really engaging. The only criticism I would have is that there were a lot of examples, like example studies cited, which I know every psychology class does that, but there were just so many examples and you had to kind of remember all of them, because the other criticism that I have is that the exams were slightly weird. They were asked very, very specific questions, and I felt like I was kind of being tested on my memorization rather than on how well I could understand and apply the content. But overall, I loved almost everything we learned, so I would definitely take it again, and I would recommend it to any Yale students. If you're in freshman or sophomore year, definitely try and take this class if you can. Okay, moving up to number 4 on the list, we have Introduction to Psychology. So this class, I was not expecting to like it as much as I did, because I had heard that most intro classes are pretty boring, but this was so interesting. I really loved this class. This class was worth 1 credit. All of the classes I've taken in this video are worth 1 credit, apart from my language classes. And I took this class because I was interested in majoring in psychology, and I thought it would be a helpful overview to see if that is something that I'm interested in, which it definitely is. I do feel like this class helped me decide whether or not to major in psychology, and also if you do major in psychology, you have to take this class. It's a prerequisite for the major, so that's why I took it. The classes were 2 75-minute lectures every single week, and the professor was great. I really, really liked the professor. I thought his teaching style worked really well for me. I found myself to be really engaged and interested throughout his lectures. This was my favourite class that I took during my fall semester. So my spring semester classes were obviously better than my fall semester ones overall, but this was the best class I took during fall semester. I really looked forward to going to it every single week. The content was really not too difficult, and the course load was a little bit less than my other classes. I felt there was still it's a lot of memorization, intro psychology. I think that's probably true at a lot of universities. So I did have to, you know, keep a lot of notes, and I kept like updating my notes after each lecture, just reading over them a lot, trying to memorize them. But overall, I felt like the course load was a little bit less than most of my other classes, so that was good. I'm trying to remember, I think one of the reasons for that is that we didn't have any problem sets or things that were due kind of every week. I think we just had a couple of midterm exams, and we had a final exam, and we also had this book report that we had to do. So we had to read, we had a selection of 3 different books that we could choose to read all about psychology, and then we had to read it and write a book report on it. So I think those were the only things we had to do, which meant there was no kind of regular homework apart from just staying on top of your notes, or however you like to kind of learn the content. So that was probably why the workload felt like it was a little bit less. But yeah, the exams were very much memorization based, like even more so than the previous class I talked about. These exams were purely memorization. There was like hardly any application of the content. There was very, very few questions where I felt like I was being tested on my ability to apply and understand the content. It was really just like rote memorization, and the questions were also, a lot of the questions were identical to the ones that we had in the practice exam. So if you did the practice exam, then you could just like copy paste your answers if you're able to like memorize them into the actual exam. So that was questionable, but luckily I have a pretty good memory, so that actually ended up working out in my favor, I think. The content that the class covered was really just introduction to psychology material. It covered a very kind of broad range of things. It tried to cover everything that's in the psychology field, but just obviously not in a lot of detail. But the aim of the course was just to give you kind of a brief understanding of every part of psychology. And I will say this about all of the psychology classes that I've taken at Yale so far: the psychology professors, from my experience, are the best at making their content and their lectures engaging. They use so many photos and videos, and like their PowerPoint presentations are just so engaging, like compared to the economics ones, which are so boring. The psychology lecturers have a way of, probably because they have a good understanding of human psychology and how, you know, to make people interested and engaged in learning things. I found that all of my psychology professors, when they were doing their lectures, were very, very engaging, and I found myself staying interested for most of the time. So that was I thought that was one of the best parts about Intro to Psych, was just the lecturer's style and the way that I was very, very interested throughout the entire class. Big thumbs up for Intro to Psych. Loved it, would definitely take it again, and would definitely recommend it to everyone. Even if you're not majoring in psychology, I think it's just a really interesting class to take. Now we're moving up into the top 3 positions. So number 3 is my seminar that I took spring semester called The US and the Pacific World. So this seminar was basically about US history, but from the perspective of the Pacific Islands, so Hawaii, the Philippines, Guam, American Samoa. It talked a lot about how the US kind of acquired its overseas territories and then Hawaii. It was just US history, but from that kind of angle, which I found really, really interesting because I had very little understanding of US history. We didn't really get taught it at my high school. So it was really cool to kind of begin my academic learning in the area of US history from this specific angle. The class was worth 1 credit, and the reason why I took it was, number 1, my friend Julia was also taking it, and number 2, it was fulfilling one of my distributional requirements, which is just a part of Yale's kind of like liberal arts model of education. So I kind of needed to take a class in this broad area, but I chose this one because Julia was in it. She was the one who kind of told me about it. I wouldn't have probably found it otherwise because there's so many classes at Yale to choose from. It's really kind of hard to, you know, find them sometimes. So those were the reasons why I initially chose to take this class. Those and the fact that the content like sparked my interest. I wouldn't have taken it if I didn't think I was going to be interested in it. This class was a discussion-based seminar, which I absolutely loved. So what that means is it meets just once a week. It went for 2 hours once a week. So it's a very long class, obviously a 2-hour class, but it only meets once a week, which is something that I absolutely loved, and for that reason I'm taking a couple more history seminars next semester. The class size of history seminars is very small, so, and this one was particularly small. I think there was around 10 students in the class. Like I said, it was a discussion-based seminar, so how those work at Yale is you get a lot of readings to do before each class. So each week you are assigned a bunch of readings that you have to do, and for this class, some of the weeks there was like 200 pages of readings. Like there was so much reading that you had to do, and you would do all of the readings before that week's class, and then you go to that week's class and you just sit around a table with the other students. So that's why there's not many students in the class. With the other students and the professor, you all just sit and you discuss the readings from that week. You just talk about the readings, talk about what you learn and how it connects to the kind of broader themes and ideas of the course. Usually the professor will kind of lead the discussion, and they'll have a PowerPoint presentation. So at the start of the class they will speak a little bit on, they'll kind of teach you. So for example, if we're doing a week about Guam, they'll talk a little bit about the history of Guam and kind of summarize the readings, and then they'll have like different questions that we then discuss as a class, and then the discussion will just open up to any other questions people want to pose or other things that people want to talk about. So that's usually what happens. The professor will usually lead the class, but this class actually did something different. Our professor led the first couple of classes, and then from then on for the rest of the semester, each student in the class got to lead the class for the week. So we all got to be the professor for a week. So during the week that we were doing our class lead, we had to do these extra background readings, and then we had to prepare the PowerPoint presentation, do a little talk at the start of the class, just summarizing everything and giving a little bit more background onto whatever we were talking about that week, and then we had to design discussion questions and activities and all of these different things. I really liked that. I thought that idea was great. It allowed you to kind of engage with the content for your week on a deeper level, and it was just fun to have each person be the professor for a different week, because everyone kind of had a different style of how they did their PowerPoint and their teaching, so it just kind of spiced up the class. And also my professor for this class, best professor ever. She was so good. She was just so like intelligent and passionate about what she was teaching. She allowed us a lot of flexibility with our deadlines. She was kind of very aware of like mental health and making sure she didn't want any of the like work she gave us to you know, have a negative impact on our lives, in, you know, so she just wanted to make sure that we were all doing okay, and if we needed extensions that was totally fine. Due dates were flexible, and she's just done so much work in this kind of like subject area. She was just so knowledgeable. It was really cool to learn from her. The content was super interesting, and the course load was probably about average. There were a lot of readings each week, but that's all you had to do each week. So you just had the readings each week, you had your class lead presentation that you had to prepare and then do, and then you also, our kind of end of semester So for history seminars, they don't usually have an end of semester exam. Instead, they will have a final paper or final project that you have to do at the end of the semester. So for this class, we had to pick something that was interesting to us, that was kind of within the parameters of what the course was about, and we had to find articles and historical papers and things to like look at to learn about that topic very specifically, and then we could either write an essay on it or we could present our final project in another format. So personally, my final project, I actually wrote a revised Australian high school history syllabus, which focused on centering Aboriginal and Indigenous voices in Australian history, because when I went through high school, we did not learn Australian history, hardly at all. And when we did learn it, we did not learn it from an Indigenous or First Nations perspective. The Australian history curriculum needs a complete do-over in my opinion, so I decided to do that myself. So I just wrote a revised history syllabus for year 11 and 12 ATAR. So this took me a very long time to write, but it was so interesting. I was looking at so many primary and secondary sources. I did so much reading into the area. It was such an interesting project to do, and I'm really glad that I was able to do a final project in something that I'm really interested in and something that I was really kind of passionate about. So that was the final project that I had for that class. We had a draft of that due at some stage during the semester, then we had another draft due, and we had to do like a peer review of someone else's paper, and then we had to finally submit it at the end of the semester. So that was the main kind of thing that we had to do, apart from our class lead and our readings each week. Overall, I loved this class. It was so good, and I would absolutely 100% take it again. Okay, number 2 on the list is Psychology and the Good Life. So this is Yale's famous happiness class, and I am going to film a separate video on this just because it was a very cool class to take. The class is about happiness, and it basically teaches students how to be happier, which is unfortunately something that a lot of college students feel they need. So the class kind of just goes through what we think makes us happy and why we're wrong, and then what actually does make us happy and how we can put that into practice in real life. The class was worth 1 credit, and I took it because everybody wanted to take this class, and it's only been taught once before in 2018, and it was a new class back then, and the professor thought, oh, it's a new class, so not that many people will take it. She was very wrong. Over 1,000 students took that class. I think it was around 1,200, making it by far and away Yale's most popular class. It was so big it had to be taught in the concert hall because not everyone would fit in the lecture theatre, and the class gained a lot of attention from everywhere in the world, and my professor became quite famous, at least in the academic community. She was interviewed on lots of television shows, and there was articles about her in the New York Times and about her class, you know, and all these very famous publications in many different countries. And she now has her own podcast, which is called The Happiness Lab, and she has a lot of like followers on there and on Twitter. So yeah, it's kind of just a famous class. But she hasn't actually taught the class again since it was taught in 2018. And she decided to teach it for the second time this past semester in 2022. But this time the class was capped at, I think, 350 students. So it was basically just done on a first come, first served process. So I was in that class the moment we could add classes to our timetable at 9 AM. I was in the class. And people woke up at like 9:02 AM, and the class was completely, like, they had to go on the wait list because everyone was trying to get into that class. So there was a wait list of like 500 people. It was very high in demand, so I'm very grateful that I was able to take it because I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great class. There were 2 75-minute lectures each week, and in terms of homework and assignments, we had 4 quizzes throughout the semester, but you were able to drop 2 of them, so only 2 of them had to count. There were a couple of midterms, and there was also a final. We also had to do this kind of research project, which was called like Project Happiness, or it was called the Hack Yourself Project. So you had to think of something based on what we'd learned in the class so far that you thought would improve your happiness, and you had to like write an experiment or an investigation as to how you would do an investigation to see if this does actually make you happier, and then you had to actually do the experiment or investigation in real life. So you had to implement this kind of happiness thing in your life and basically we did an experiment to see if whether it made us happier or not, and we had to do a write-up on that in the final exam. There were a lot of cool different things that this class did, and I'm gonna go more into those in the separate video that I'm gonna film on this class. 2 examples of things that they did was that they had an app which we could download, and it would like guide us through different like things to make us happier each week. You had a few things to do each day on there that would boost your happiness, and you could kind of check them off and get points and stuff. And then we also had these things called psych fams, where the professor would kind of pair us with 4 or 5 other students in the class, and each group was given $20, and then you could go and get ice cream or spend that money in a fun way as a group, and then like you would kind of catch up with your group every now and then, because that's like social connection, etc., which boosts your happiness. So that was cool. I thought the content was great. The workload was definitely very manageable. It wasn't too bad at all. And overall, it was just a really interesting class to take. There was a lot of controversy around the class as to, there's like some haters of the class who are like, there's some people who think the class is terrible, think all of the stuff that you learn is kind of useless and it's not very good, and don't like the professor and just like hate on the class. I didn't love everything about the class, but I think that the content that I learnt was really interesting, and there's a lot of things that I do think that I've been able to apply in my life, and I think I'll be able to apply moving forwards. And I think the content and the way that the course was structured was like, it was structured really well. I thought the structure of it was great. In terms of just the order in which we went through the content and the organization of it all. I thought it was a really well put together class, and I found the lectures mostly engaging. We had a couple of guest lecturers as well, which was that's always interesting, just to kind of get someone else's perspective and like break up the monotony of listen to the same person speak every single week. So I thought it was a great class. I'm really glad I took it, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who is able to get into it. It's not going to be taught again next year because the professor is going on a leave of absence for the next academic year, I think. So it's probably not going to be taught again until 2024 at least, apparently. So I'm glad I got in it this semester because I'm graduating in 2024. So I wouldn't have been able to take it if I hadn't taken it last semester. Moving on to the first class, or the class that's in first position, the best class that I took in my sophomore year at Yale. This was such a good class, and honestly this class, Psych and the Good Life, the US and the Pacific World, and Intro to Psychology are all kind of similar, especially the top 3. They're very similar. It was hard to split them, but I think the best class I took at Yale my sophomore year was a history seminar called The Olympic Games, Ancient and Modern. And if you can guess by the title of this class, it's basically about the Olympic Games. So it just goes through the history of the Olympic Games, starting in ancient Greece, and you know, with all of the ancient games and the Greek mythology and all of that stuff, and then moving forwards to the modern day Olympic Games back when they restarted again in 1896, I want to say. I really should know that. Back, you know, when they restarted in Athens, and then all the way through when there was like the World War II, and you had like the Berlin Olympics and Jesse Owens, and then moving through to like when females were able to enter the Olympics, and then going through to kind of like the modern day age, and we talked about like the Special Olympics and the gay games, and then all of the issues that surround the modern day Olympics in the 21st century. So like the gender rules and transgender athletes and doping and like special equipment like shoes that make you run really fast, like technology basically, shoes that are so good that then they get banned, or swimsuits that are so good that then they get banned, like all of that kind of stuff. As an athlete, this was just it was such an interesting class. I learned so much. I think the structure of the class was so good, the way we just kind of went through chronologically in time and talked about like the different controversies that were at different times, and like all of these different, oh my gosh, I just have so much information in my head after this class, and it was all things that I'm so passionate about because I just love sports, and I loved learning about the Olympics. I realized how much I didn't know, and it's so exciting and fun to feel like I have learned so much and know all these things now. So this was worth 1 credit, this class, and the reason why I took this class was because it sounded so interesting. Every single student in the class, apart from 1, was a student athlete. So there was 18 students in the class. Because it is a discussion-based seminar, it was capped at 18, and everyone was an athlete. So that was also just a fun dynamic, very different to all of my other classes where most of the students are not athletes. And it just made it a little bit more of a relaxed class, I guess. As it was a discussion-based history seminar, this class just met once a week for 2 hours, so similar to my other history seminar. And also similar to my other history seminar, we had a lot of readings to complete before each class, so that was our main homework. Our professor kind of led the discussion each week for most of the class, but each student had to do a 10 to 15 minute presentation at the start of each class. Not each student at the start of each class. At the start of each class, 1 or 2 students did a 10 to 15 minute presentation on something that really sparked their interest in the readings that week. So I did mine with Julia, who's my friend who took this class with me as well as my other seminar with me. And we just had to prepare like a 15-minute PowerPoint presentation on some of the things that stood out to us in the readings from that week, and we would present that to the class and then ask the class some discussion questions to get us going with the discussion for that week, and then the professor would kind of take over leading the class and we would just have a class discussion about the themes and ideas and the content in general. As well as during the readings, each week we had a discussion question, which would be asking us a question about something that we had read in one of the readings, and we had to do kind of a couple of paragraphs in response to that and post it on Canvas each week. And then we also had our little kind of class presentation that was pretty small, and then we also had to write a final paper on something. It could be anything. So my final paper was basically on mental health and why rates of depression and anxiety are higher in individual sport athletes compared to team sport athletes. People chose so many different topics. My friend Julia did hers on technology and kind of the super shoes in running and how they have like had an impact in the Olympics and just in general the running sphere in general. Other people did theirs more on like some of the ancient material that we read from the ancient games and kind of the spirit of the game. There's like, you could do it basically anything to do with sports or the Olympics you could write your final paper on. So we had to submit a draft for our final paper at some stage during the semester. Oh, we also, as well as the final paper, which we had to submit drafts on kind of towards the end of the semester and then submit the paper at the end of the semester, we also had a kind of a mini paper that we had to write, which was, say, the final paper was like 12 to 15 pages, and the mini paper, which was due kind of a third of the way through the semester, that was maybe 6 pages, and we had to write that one on something to do with like the ancient games. A theme or idea that you found interesting during our section on the ancient games, which was kind of the first third of the semester. So we had that paper, and then we had the final paper. The workload for this course was just average. There was a reasonable amount of work to do, as there is for most classes at Yale. It was kind of just, it wasn't more or less than any of my other classes really, it was just kind of about average. And overall, this was obviously such a great class. I really, really loved it. Would definitely recommend to anyone who's interested in sports or the Olympics. I thought it was really well structured. I really enjoyed the structure of the content of the class, and just our discussions each week were so fun. It was so fun because you just got to go in and sit around a table and talk with other athletes about issues in sport and like the Olympics, and like, who doesn't want to do that? It was so fun. So there you go. Those are all of the classes I took during my sophomore year at Yale, and here is the final ranking list. And as you can see, my spring semester of classes this past sophomore spring was the best semester of classes I have ever had. I loved all of my classes so much that semester. It was just so much fun. I really kind of fell in love with learning. I've always loved learning, but this past semester at college has really made me just kind of re-fall in love with learning. I'm so grateful I've been able to take all these cool and interesting classes and to learn from such amazing professors and also from my equally incredible peers. It's been a pretty good sophomore year of classes, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys all of my experiences throughout my next 2 years at college and all of the classes that I take as well. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you're not already. Guys, everything is going wrong in the last like 20 seconds of the video. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Instagram, and please leave me a comment below underneath this video letting me know which of these classes that you think you would be most interested in taking, because I've loved a lot of these classes, but some of them definitely wouldn't be for some people. So maybe leave me a comment below letting me know which class you think you would enjoy the most and which class you think you would enjoy the least. I feel like that would be very interesting to hear. Thank you again for getting all the way through this video. I think it's been quite a long one, so I really appreciate you sticking around to the end. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!